y'all, welcome to Farm Girl Diaries. My name is Caitlin and today is the first day of our sourdough series. So I decided to do a sourdough series because I just gifted two of my girlfriends some of my sourdough starter so they could start making their own breads, and they're completely, I think, overwhelmed. I keep getting texts and questions. I think they're feeling a little intimidated. So I decided to do this series, one, to help them, and two, to help anyone else out there that either has a starter and is struggling to know how to use it, or is always wanting to get into sourdough and doesn't know how to do it. So I think that this is going to be a really good series. We're going to start from the beginning. Today we're going to do a whole bunch of information about sourdough, give you the rundown, give you the whole backstory on sourdough, and then the next video we're going to start our sourdough starter together, and then we're going to make a whole bunch of breads. So I'm going to give you guys some recipes that are one-day breads. So sourdough is normally a time-consuming process, number one, and number two, it requires a lot of hands-on attention. So there are a lot of recipes out there that'll tell you, okay, have your bread rise for 2 hours, come back and knead it, and then have it rise for another 2 hours, and then come back and knead it. And if you work a full-time job, that can be really hard. If you have a family and kids and sports, that can be really demanding, and just make it so that you can't actually make your own homemade bread. That's not the case. I work a full-time job, and I have found / modified some recipes that I can start in the morning before I go to work in 15 minutes, not a lot of, and I can bake them when I get home. So I start them in the morning, bake them when I get home, no knead time, they don't require my attention, they're really self-sufficient. So we're going to get started with talking about what is a sourdough starter. So when you make bread from the store, a lot of times you're using yeast, and this is yeast that has been cultivated and been sold in packets and jars. A sourdough starter is collecting the wild yeast that is in flour. So when you go to the grocery store, you have a couple different flours, but the main two that you have are bleached and unbleached flour. Bleached flour has been chemically bleached, and everything in it has been killed, whereas unbleached flour has not been chemically processed. And you can take that, add some water to it, and do this kind of set of rules, and you can capture the wild yeast. So when you use yeast for cooking, it makes your bread rise. Sourdough starter and the wild yeast does the exact same thing. So it's just you're trading store-bought yeast for yeast that you can capture yourself. And sourdough starter does have obviously a sour flavor. It's called sourdough. It does have a sour flavor. However, I've been making sourdough breads for just over a year, and I don't taste it anymore. I think it tastes like normal bread. I cannot distinguish the sour part at all. So I think, especially once you get into it, I think that part goes away. And I use my sourdough starter for every single loaf of bread I make. I will never go back and use yeast again. I'm gonna use my sourdough starter every single time. So my next video is gonna cover sourdough starter and how to make it, but this I want to show is mine. This is my sourdough starter, and I'm going to be teaching you how to make a big one like this. There is, in the sourdough world, there is some conversations about how much sourdough you actually need. I've seen a lot of people, like Whisper Merlot Farms for one, who has a very little sourdough starter, and when she discards all but like 1 tablespoon, and then she feeds it and reuses it. I like to have this much because I like to make multiple breads sometimes. If I'm having people over, or if I want to give some away as gifts, I like making multiple breads, and this gives me the capability of doing that. So I got him out of the fridge. This is not all starter. He is half risen right now. He normally is down around here, so I don't have a ton. He is half risen right now, and you can see this in his little bubbles. So those little bubbles, while small, those little bubbles show that he's active. And I just got him out of the fridge about 5 minutes ago, so he's still cold. So as he warms up, that yeast will get more active, they'll be moving about, and then he'll start rising and he'll thaw. So what does that mean? Cold versus hot and my yeast moving. When you make a sourdough starter, for the first week, you're going to keep him on your counter, you're going to keep him someplace warm, probably maybe even on your fridge, on a little fireplace stove, anywhere you can keep him warm, around 80, 90 degrees. And what's going to happen is as it gets warm, that yeast is going to be moving around, and the yeast is going to be eating all the food. It's going to be eaten in there, and when it eats, it's going to make your sourdough starter rise. As it stops eating, it's gonna fall. So when your sourdough has fallen and it's down where it was when you initially fed it, that's when you know you need to feed him again. The temperature of your room can have a big impact on how fast your starter rises and falls. And that's one of the things that you need to learn just as a sourdough maker. A lot of people struggle because they read the books and they say, the book said I need to let it rise for 8 hours and then I can bake it. Well, their kitchen was only at 65 degrees. It didn't rise enough. They didn't get a good bread. So with sourdough, you really do need to, 1, follow the directions, and then 2, not follow the directions. You need to know what you're looking for. So for example, in my kitchen right now, I have an old farmhouse. It's like, I think 67 degrees in there. So I know for my kitchen currently, it's the middle of winter for my kitchen currently, my starter, when I feed it to when I need to feed it again, if I leave it on the counter, it takes a full 24 hours. It takes 24 hours for it to eat, rise, and then fall. In the summertime, if I put my starter on my counter, let's say my kitchen is probably 75 degrees, that's pretty common, I don't have central air, 75 degrees, my starter will rise and fall much faster. And I'm talking about that could happen in a matter of hours, in a matter of 7 hours or so. So the temperature of your house, your kitchen, will really influence how fast your starter rises, but also how fast or how slow your bread rises. So when you make your sourdough starter, if you're not actively using him, you can keep him in the fridge. I keep mine in the fridge. Keep him in the fridge and he will eat much, much slower. He's not all active, ready to go. He's cold and he's just gonna eat much, 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 much slower. So I fed this guy, I fed him a week ago and I let him rise a little bit and then I put him in the fridge. So he's still a little risen. So when I'm ready to make bread again, I'll get him out, keep him on the counter, and he'll rise probably a little bit more and then he'll fall. And then I'll feed him and get ready to make another loaf of bread. So just keep in mind as you're going through this, the temperature in your house is really gonna play a role. If the bread doesn't look risen enough, don't bake it yet. Let it rise some more. Those times in your cookbooks and in these videos are going to be very subjective based on what is happening in your own kitchen. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So I want to talk about some of the sourdough rules and how you can make yourself more successful as you're making your sourdough breads. First is your sourdough needs a name. Mine is named Stanley. This is Stanley. I don't know why his name is Stanley. It fit. And Stanley is about a year old. I started doing sourdough just over a year ago. And I think it is a work of art. I really do. I think it's something that you have to learn how to do. It's not a cake when you can just follow the recipe and have success every single time. Again, things like the temperature in your house, things like your time that you proof time. There are so many factors that can play a part in your bread making. But when you get a good loaf of bread, it is the most satisfying thing in the world. I have made multiple successful loaves. I honestly don't know how much. I make bread weekly. I've made so many successful loaves, and I've made some that have been not successful, absolutely. But I've never gotten over that fact when you open the oven and there is a gorgeous loaf in your oven. That feeling never goes away. And then whenever I have people over for dinner, I'm always making bread, and everyone's like, oh, this is so nice. Did you buy this? It's like, no, I made it. That feeling doesn't go away. I've been doing this for a little over a year and I still lap it up. So I think the idea of having your sourdough starter, giving it a name, and realize that it is a work of art and you are the artist is, I think, a really great part in the success for you to move forward and have successful loaves. You will have bad loaves. Something will happen, timing, whatever. You will have bad loaves. Don't let that discourage you. Just learn what you did wrong and learn how to move forward. Next I want to talk about is Hooch. So sourdough starter is wild yeast. It's a living thing, which is why we name it. It's a living thing. And the yeast is in there feeding. So when your sourdough starter rises, that's your yeast eating. And then it falls. That means your yeast has run out of food and needs to be refed. When I put this in the fridge, if I could leave my sourdough starter in the fridge, I've left it in there for 2 weeks. This guy has been in there for a week. I could easily go another 2 weeks, if not 3. He is doing good. So When he's hungry, I'll pull him out of the fridge, and that's when I'm going to use him first. But if I'm not going to use him, I'll leave him in the fridge till I see that he's hungry, and then I'll pull him out and feed him. How do I know that he's hungry? Well, and I'll try to put a picture in here. When you look at your starter, a liquid will form and be like a little grayish liquid, and it's called Hooch. And what that is essentially the waste of the yeast. This is how it shows that they have eaten everything they can eat. There's not much more for them to eat. They need to be fed. So it's this gray liquid on top called Hooch. And there is some debate. Do you stir it back into your sourdough or do you discard? I honestly don't think it matters. I have done both, but now I just stir it back in. It doesn't hurt my sourdough starter. I had no problem with it getting stirred back in. I think it's basically just going to be your personal preference. What would you rather do? It doesn't really matter. But that's how you know that he's hungry. He's going to have this gray liquid on top, and it's going to be called Hooch. When you see that, that's when you know you want to feed your starter. You don't really need to feed him before that unless you were planning on baking bread. So that's where the next thing comes in line. Talk about timing. With bread, especially with sourdoughs can be incredibly demanding. If you work a full-time job, if you have kids, you got to run everywhere, or you just want to do other things yourself, sourdough starter may not be the thing for you. However, like I said, I do have some recipes that you can do that in a day. But your timing needs to be a couple days before. You need to kind of think, okay, I have a party on Saturday. I want to make bread on Saturday. What do I got to do to have my bread ready for my Saturday dinner? So what that normally means for me is on Thursday, I'll get my starter out of the fridge, anytime on Thursday, get him out of the fridge, put him on the counter, let him rise and fall. Let him get up to temperature and let him get hungry. When I see that he's fallen, I will feed him. Then I'll let him rise, and in the middle of that active rise is when I will use him to make my bread. So you just gotta kind of time that out. Again, like for me, I know right now my kitchen takes about 24 hours to do an active rise and fall. So it gives me some leeway between when I make my bread, when I get the starter out, when I feed him, and when I make my bread. If you live in a warmer kitchen or warmer climate, or if you're watching this video in the summertime, that timeline can get cut down a little bit. If you get your starter out, it might only take 3 or 4 hours for him to rise and fall. You gotta feed him, and then you gotta catch him ideally before he falls the whole way. With sourdough, you can get a sour flavor if you use him when he's fallen, when he's hungry. The hungrier the sourdough is, the more sour flavor you're gonna get. I prefer using him right after he started to fall, and he's nice and active and bubbly. That's when I prefer to use him. So you just gotta get the timing down and learn and kind of figure out and plan it out in your head. When do you start? When you get your starter out, when do you feed him, and when do you use him? What is really nice, one of the first books I have is this book, Flour, Salt, Water, Yeast, or Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast. And this book it gives a ton of good recipes for yeast breads as well as some sourdough breads. So you can do both with this book. You can do yeast breads, and you can do some sourdoughs. But what is really nice with this one is this book tells you when to do everything. So one of my favorite recipes in this book is the overnight country blonde. And with this, so he gives a schedule on when you do everything. So with this one, it says, feed the leaven at 9 a.m., mix the dough at 5 p.m., shape into loaves at 8 a.m. the next morning, and bake at noon. So you know exactly when you have to do every step. So you can, 1, use this to plan out your day, or 2, use this timeline and modify it to fit your timeline. Instead of starting at 9, start at 2. How does that affect the rest of the hours? So all of these recipes in here give that timeline, which is really important. And especially if you're brand new to sourdough, a book like this might be useful because it tells you exactly the hours. Again, it's gonna be based on your kitchen's temperature as well. That's gonna definitely play a part. So don't forget that aspect. So when you're getting into sourdough, just keep that in mind. Keep in mind, before you make the bread, you have to get your sourdough starter out of the fridge. You have to let it warm up the temperature. You have to feed it, and then you can use it. And you can use it at any point in the feeding process, whether it's active or when it's fallen, based on the level of sourness that you want in your bread. One big thing that is important to sourdough is weighing your ingredients. I've had a lot of people tell me I tried to make sourdough and I just couldn't do it. And 99% of the time, the reason they cannot do it is because they're measuring their ingredients and not weighing. For some reason, I don't honestly understand why, measuring and weighing are two different things, and sourdough does not like to be measured. It likes to be weighed in grams. So I highly suggest you get a scale, and that's how you do everything. That's how you make your sourdough starter, and that's how you do all of your breads. You weigh everything. Whenever I make breads now, I never ever get my measuring cups out. I weigh everything. Sourdough starter is an actual built-in supply material. You can use sourdough starter as cement, and I'm positive if my house started to fall down, I just put some sourdough starter on that wall and it would hold it together. What do I mean? Sourdough starter, if I get this anywhere that I don't want it, it turns into cement. So you can see up here, I have a whole bunch. This is cement. If you're using a dish, a fork, this, whatever, you could just put it in the sink and let it sit and soak, and it will eventually come off. It is a pain in the butt, but it will come off. But do not get your sourdough starter on the floor, on your countertops, on cabinets, anywhere else. It is cement. You can use this to build yourself a house. I'm gonna do it one day. It's gonna work. It is cement. So with sourdough starter as well, when you're using materials, you always want to use a glass or a pottery bowl. You never want to use metal with sourdough starter or rubber, because I'm not quite sure of the science, but it will kill the yeast in your sourdough starter. So stick to silver. I use silverware, I use my glass bowls, I use pottery bowls. Stick to glass or pottery at all times. You can also use wood. You can use wood like spatulas to stir it as well. But everything needs to be washed immediately. Don't let it sit, because it will turn into a cement. So there are a couple different things you can do with your sourdough starter once you have him made and active. Like I said, I keep mine in the fridge. If I'm not using him, he's in the fridge, safe, tucked away, and so I need to use him again. But if you're going to be actively using him, leave him on your counter. You will need to feed him every day, but you can use him every day. Right now, my starter is cold. I have some tips and tricks I'm going to talk about in the next videos about how I could use him today if I wanted to. But if I didn't have any additional tricks, I would need to get him out. I wouldn't be able to use him until tomorrow. So when it comes back to your timing, but it comes back to what is working best for your schedule. With sourdough starter, we're going to talk about our next video how to make a sourdough starter, but you can buy them online, and you can also buy a dehydrated starter online. So if you are not really interested in making your sourdough yourself, absolutely go online, find one online, and you can use that instead. Simple, easy peasy. You don't need to make it yourself. Or if you know somebody like me that has an active sourdough starter, you can just get some from them. So when you feed your sourdough, when this guy's hungry, I will discard all but 113 grams of this. I believe I'm using a King Arthur recipe. I'll discard all but 113 grams of this. And by discard, I mean I throw it away. You can use your discard for lots of things. You can use it for crackers, for pancakes, for waffles, for a ton of different things you can use your discard for. I'm not trying to do that normally. Normally I just want my bread. I don't have time to deal with the discard, so I just throw my discard away. So my discard, well, my 113 grams is probably close to like half a cup. So out of all of this, I'm only going to keep half a cup. So if you know somebody that has a sourdough starter, their discard could be your new starter. So just ask them, hey, when you discard, can you give me some? And then you can feed it yourself and make it and keep it active. Lastly, we have some supplies that you probably would like to have when you're starting your sourdoughs. The first couple of things that we're going to make don't require any of these supplies, but we will be using these in the future. We're going to start easy and then work our way up to the big, beautiful sourdough artisanal loaf with the big ear. We're working our way forward to that. But until we get there, you might want to start looking at purchasing some of these things for yourself. So the first one is going to be a batten. And this is a batten. It's just a bowl, and I coat the inside with flour, and you put your bread in here, and it rises in here. You can I bought mine on Amazon. So a lot of sourdough recipes make 2 sourdough breads at once. So I recommend buying 2 at the same time, but I didn't. So I just use a basket. I had this old basket. I think it's an egg basket, and it works just as well. And it's annoying that it has this on it, but it works just as well. So you do need, if you want to make the beautiful artisanal round loaves, you should have a batten that will help you. Next, you need a Dutch oven. And when you bake a lot of your breads in the oven, your oven's going to be at a temperature of around 500, 450, 475, 500, depending on the recipe. So your oven's going to get really hot, and you need a Dutch oven. I recommend you buy a Dutch oven or you use a Dutch oven strictly for your breads. I'm going to show you. If anyone knows how to clean this, I would love to know, because I don't know. This is what happens to your Dutch oven. So use the same one every time so you don't make your Dutch ovens all ugly. But they do get black. They do get burnt. I've never actually burnt a loaf in here, surprisingly. I know, looking at that, you would think I burnt a loaf, but I haven't. But just the high temperatures will definitely scar your Dutch oven. So make sure that you're using the same one every single time. And you do need one. I don't know of any, and if anyone in the comments knows, please let me know. But I don't know of any other way that you could make the artisanal, the round loaves, I'll put a picture here to show you, without having a Dutch oven. But again, there is a ton of things that you can do without having these supplies. I'm gonna show you all of them. I'm gonna show you, we're gonna make focaccias and bagels and breads. We're gonna make all these different things that you don't need any of these supplies, but you're still gonna use your sourdough starter. So I hope this was informative. As we get into our actual bread, there'll be a ton of more information coming out, but I wanted to start in the beginning and just give you a quick rundown on sourdough, how sourdough works, and the rules of sourdough, because it can be a little finicky, but if you just master those rules and understand how it works, it's a breeze. And it's something that I'm sure you're going to enjoy and love, and it brings so much satisfaction to you when you have a successful loaf and everyone is telling you how good it is. So this is going to be a fun journey. I hope you want to join me on it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything, and I'll be back in our next video with how to make a sourdough starter.